It's a treat to be up here at a closing plenary at NW. I think the last time I did this was 2005. And it was about making sense of modern art. And it's a touching moment, actually. This has been a great conference. I want to thank Nancy and everybody who's made it happen, and everybody who's here. And it's great to see the next generation coming to the fore. So the particular research that is in this book, and that culminated in this book, actually started at MW in 2007, when I was talking about our Matthew Barney Drawing Restraint exhibition at SFMOMA, and this extensive array of visitor interpretive affordances we had put out there to make the mute plastic speak, as it were. As you can, if you can see that on the right, it's a little washed out. I don't know if we can do anything with the lighting there. And we thought we were measuring visitor preferences for guide-by-cell cell phone tours versus antenna MP3 tours versus downloaded podcasts, all bearing the same content, to kind of identify what the preference, what the preferences were in the technology sector. While we're at it, we're also evaluating a learning lounge that included videos of the artist talking about his work, and big FAQ super graphics on the walls, and kiosk with a kind of a web kiosk that was also a kiosk of information about Matthew Barney and books and all these other things, and wall texts. And so it's a multi-pronged interpretive system. And so we did evaluate all that, actually. And we found out, among other things, that cell phone tours had 4,000 unique users and 2.4 calls per user. But then the bad news was that we're still only averaging 45 visitors a day on the cell phone tour, 3.7% of the exhibition visitors. And at that point, that gave me pause, that fact. So in my presentation, this is a slide from that presentation, somewhere along the line the target shifted. And I said, here's where you can kick me out of this conference. Nancy remembers this slide. Because I realized that the topic was no longer about technology. And this is a complete echo of yesterday's digital strategy session and the conversation we had in Rob's group upstairs. We were down the road, down the hall. If our goal is to use technology, we may just nod and move on. But if our goal is to enhance visitor experience, we have to think larger. Okay, so here we are 10 years later. And a couple of years ago, this visitor comment card came up at SFMOMA, along with another one I showed earlier in the session with Sina and Thomas Ryan and Scott. And this one says, it's a big question mark mounted on a wall with a wall label next to it with a few lines of text. And this person looking at that big question mark and saying, I'm not sure I quite understand modern art. So my question then is, are we forcing this person to take out his or her phone? Too often museums really do see technology as a way to sidestep the bigger issues that we're not prepared to face. We want to have the immaculate gallery. We prize that above all else, because that's the irreducible litmus test against which anything looks like art. Right? You take it out of the world, you put it in that white cube, suddenly it has to be considered as art. So that's the bottom line for a lot of people, like curators and directors in particular, very often. But in the meantime, we're not answering the big questions. Why would anyone make this? What's it doing in this big, important building? In other words, what's remarkable about it? What does it have to do with the other works in the same gallery that's sharing this space with me? And what would I be doing if I made this, or were in this historic person's groups? In a word, as people in a focus group at a museum that I was at said, why should I care? Tell me why I should care, and I will. Just give me a reason. I want to care. I know it's important. I know these are the cultural treasures. I know they're important. They're in this big important building. Tell me why. Give me a reason. So that was a question we set out to find answers to. And there's Mimi Michaelson actually in having like a cappuccino and a crumpet or something in Glasgow at Kelvin Grove Gallery. And we visited 10 sites nominated by colleagues as innovators in visitor-centered interpretation. And they were mainly art museums, but we knew we didn't want to limit ourselves to art museums because we are by no means the most generous of museums when facing our audiences. We want to have other examples as well. And then in each case, we made a site visit, and we followed it by an in-depth conversation with the museum leadership and the creative staff, so across many departments. The first day was really our site visit, where we were really kind of in the galleries before anyone told us anything. And then the second day, we let people talk to us about what they thought they were doing, and what their process was, what their goals were, and what their struggles were as well. And the case studies were from the US and a little bit in Europe, 3 places in Europe, Netherlands and Germany, 1 spot in Germany, and Glasgow. So I'm going to quickly run through the museums in our sample and give you like a little taste of some of the things that we thought were unique about each one. One thing usually about each one. Here's the Detroit Institute of Arts. How many people here have been to the DIA? Good. Okay, the middle of the room back there, you guys gotta go, okay? So we all know about hotspots in multimedia and being able to zoom in and see details and have call-outs on our screens. But what if you're not using the computer again? Well, the DIA puts that same interface in the gallery, on the floor, in front of the art. It's kind of crazy. It's almost too simple, isn't it? That's what we're looking at in this Renaissance triptych here. And you see those darkened spots here, which are, in fact, linked to call-out text to tell you what you're looking at in those parts of the painting. If you want to look at the painting without that visual aid, you get in front or behind. But if you want some help in understanding what it is that art historians or curators or anybody else think is interesting about this painting, then you have an opportunity to see that there, right? Why should I care? And on the right, there's a contemporary art piece, Richard Long's Stone Line, and there's a laminated booklet in front of it that actually is very discreet. If you look at it, if you stand at the end of the line, it's an upside stand, you don't even know it's there, it's a lucite stand. But if you stand to the side of the line, you can actually see Richard Long's drawing for how to make the piece, his instructions for how to make the piece, and little backgrounds, like a little mini 6-page magazine with large print that tells you a few different layers of, in effect, multimedia content about the piece. Okay? Actually, in the digital realm, or at least the media realm, I should say, because it's a projected film. It's not even. There's a fascinating set. How many people here? And maybe by the way I'm phrasing the question, I'm going to be skewing the response. But how many people I'll phrase the question differently. How many people bypass galleries of decorative arts? Okay. Well, that was a fair number of people. I'm certainly one of them. I'm guilty. At the DIA, it's one of the most fascinating galleries in the museum, and they've got a lot of great galleries in that museum, including the Rivera mural, and but there's a thematic installation called Splendor by the Hour, and it basically is like a novel. It's a historical novel of the French Revolution, and it's basically, and the case it makes in effect is, my God, these people lived so grandly, so decadently. In effect, that nothing that wasn't of the finest silver or gold or porcelain could ever be touch their lips or their or their surroundings. It's no surprise that it was like off with their heads a few years later. That's kind of the subtext of that whole saga in that gallery, and one of the aspects of that is that you all get to sit down at a table while this banquet is laid out, and the servants are speaking in French, preparing for the banquet in the evening. And then you get to see the banquet with all these exquisitely prepared foods laid out in front of you as if you're eating it. The only thing is that you can't really eat the pixels. And you're listening to the conversation. You're seeing these aristocratic Swedes over the table consuming it, and then you look around yourself and you realize, oh my God, all this that is being served in the very vessels that are in the gallery around me. They made the meal and they served it in everything that's surrounding me in the gallery. It's a visceral way of bringing these objects home. Very different. Ruhr Museum, Essen, Germany, a history museum. It's really kind of almost a theory of everything museum, but as seen through a very particular geolocation. It's the Ruhr formerly mining district, kind of like the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, or probably maybe some mining areas in Ohio. I don't know enough about Ohio geography. And so this is in an old coal washing plant that Rem Koolhaas has inserted a 7-story orange fluo escalator into, and you get processed up into the seventh floor of this building, of this coal washing plant, but now it's like you're no longer it's in the post-industrial age, so you're not part of the knowledge economy. You're being processed in the knowledge economy as you descend down through the different floors of this museum. And on the left, you see that they've adopted, in both of these, you see they've adapted the language of contemporary art, in effect, of the minimalist cube, in effect, to present objects from the local environment and to tell stories about them. The one right here, that's the first one you come up on, it says atablos, which means breathless, and it's a black lung from a miner who worked right below you where you're standing. In each case, there's a short couple of paragraphs on the side of these very pristine pylons, but really short, very pithy text that zeroes in on why this matters, who this was. It's always very personal. It's really about the people behind these stories, to give a portrait of this region. There's another one of beer bottles. They're all named Mr. Hans, but they're all in Chinese, because there was like a retired German brewmeister from this region that when after he retired, he responded to an ad in a Chinese, in a beer magazine for they needed a brewmeister in China. They wanted who could do European beers. He went over there and 6 different breweries ended up naming beers after him. And so those are the bottles. There's lots of different stories. Columbus Museum of Art, Merrily will talk more about that. This is on the one hand, we've got the Wonder Room on the left, where families get to make art projects in the presence of art. Like they got, when I was there, they were making Calder mobiles inspired by Alexander Calder, under an Alexander Calder mobile. Something that I won't talk about, the problems we've had with certain artists' estates about not letting us do things like that. That's really cool. And this was a couple doing a jigsaw puzzle while the man behind the table was on leave from the military that weekend, and he was there with his wife, and they were sitting in front of an Arthur Dove painting. They just completed this jigsaw puzzle as they were spending their Sunday together at the museum. Oakland Museum of California. Well, even I participate in these activities sometimes. This is the draw yourself activity, digital activity, and that then shows up amid the portraits on the California portrait wall. The whole point being is that your identity is also part of the identity of the people in California, and you're learning what it takes to make a portrait. Meanwhile, they also have every Friday night they turn into a town square for their community. A city that has no town square now has one, where there's dancing, dance lessons, dance classes. There's all the food trucks from Off the Grid come in every Friday night. Half-price gallery admission, creative activities for kids, beer and wine in a bar for adults. It's a scene. Denver Art Museum, in its multiple buildings. This is just one example of what they're doing. These are They're a great place for kids to explore. They've got little backpacks for kids. They've got bingo, with treasure hunts in the galleries, so the kids discreetly displayed, as you see in the sleeve here. But just the kid height, so they'll definitely know and they'll see them. And then there are also like creative activity spaces for adults and for kids. Kelvin Grove Gallery Museum in Glasgow. It was a fabulous old kind of Victorian, post-Victorian picture, not yet a museum, kind of a Wunderkammer museum, natural history, art, social history. And this was the closest thing. I've never seen a kiosk this close to an artwork before. They did a couple of these, and they were geared to teens. And they basically were very clear that it was a teen audience, and they wanted the teens to understand what was going on in this painting. And so they updated this girl with her two suitors, one the kind of the rich dandy, and the other the kind of more homespun farm boy who has come to the town but might have a poetic soul. She has to decide cash or romance. And then they put it all in tabloid terms, and they update it to contemporary Glasgow. You know, do you want to live in the new condos by the harbor front, or do you want to live in, you know, the outskirts with your poet boyfriend and things like that, you know. Minnesota History Center, St. Paul. This is something I've never seen before. Reserving an entire gallery space, almost as large as this room, to prototype in mock-up form an exhibition that had sensitive content, and they wanted to bring the community that it addressed, which in this case was the Dakota Indians in the Minneapolis area, Minneapolis-St. Paul area, into the museum to let them know, give them feedback on whether they were telling the story right, or whether they were being offensive in some way they were doing it. So they mocked up the whole exhibition in, you know, easy printout form, and then they brought different community groups in, and they gave them post-it notes, and they gave them log books, and they said, tell us what we're doing right, tell us what we're doing wrong, correct us. And boy, did they get corrected. This was long before the exhibition was ever made. Van Abbe Museum in the Netherlands, which has a lot of a real variety of creative things. They're actually working with artists to reinvent. You know, it's more of a social practice. The last two museums are the relational aesthetic social practice end of things, less of the interpretive end. But in this case, they asked visitors to assume a role when they came in as either a tourist, a flaneur, or a pilgrim. And then depending on which role they assumed, they gave them different props. And they had different labels next to different artworks that were on each itinerary that had been kind of pre-selected for those different identities. And then at the end, they brought them to this table, this electronic table, where they could chart their itinerary and talk about what they had seen and what they had experienced with a game master. That's the guy with the T-shirt and the arms crossed. And of course, then they've got an artist who has done this series of cartoons, in effect, about museums, including this one here. This anonymous facade with all these leads underneath and all the different people contributing to it. Finally, City Museum in St. Louis. How many people have been to City Museum? Yeah. I mean, fabulous environment. It's a museum in name only. It's a playground. It's 10 stories. But it's about curiosity and exploration and just the sheer exhilaration of being haptically involved in discovery. And these kind of artists designed and developed and sculpted multi-story playground, indoor and out. And the Museum of Contemporary Art Denver, which is about public programs as much as it is about exhibitions. And this mixed taste program that they're famous for now, where they would say, like, you know, lectures on Wittgenstein and kittens, right? An expert on Wittgenstein talking at the beginning of the evening, then a little break, an expert on kittens. Maybe not quite the same kind of expert, right? And then at the final part of the evening, bringing those two together, those two disparate topics from highbrow and lowbrow culture, and seeing creative sparks are triggered. Two takeaways from our research. Visitor-centered innovation goes hand in hand with museum change. We did not know that was going to be a finding. We just thought we were going to visit visitor-centered museums. What we found was that these museums had fundamentally reinvented the way they did business internally in order to do this. Right? Someone said, we have to keep reevaluating who's our audience and what do they need from us. For a visitor-centered museum, these questions are the starting point of all museum business.